Chapter 4, Part 2. So today, Chapter 4, Body Basics, we're going to continue and focus on, now that we are at this stage, we're going to focus on body systems. So if you remember Part 1 of Chapter 4, we spoke about cells, the makeup of cells, talked about the different types of tissues and how those tissues become organs. And now we are at the system level, and we're going to talk about the 11 main body systems. You see here digestive, cardiovascular, respiratory, lymphatic, urinary, muscular, skeletal, nervous, endocrine, integumentary, and reproductive. So as we go through each one fairly quickly, we'll hit the highlights, talk about a little bit of the medical terms related to them, and some of the major functions. So the first system, probably one that most everyone is familiar with, the cardiovascular, cardio meaning heart, vasculo meaning vessels. Okay. Main purpose to circulate blood and throughout the body. So to circulate blood for purposes of oxygenation, for expelling waste, for overall body function. You have the heart, blood itself, which is a type of tissue, and the blood vessels, arteries and veins, and capillaries. Okay. Arteries, combining form for artery, arterio, and arteries always carry blood away from the heart. Capillaries, medical term, capillo or phlebo, capillo. These are your smallest vessels, your venules and your arterioles that lead into your capillaries that are the joining of arteries and veins. And then lastly, your veins carry blood towards the heart. Combining form for that is veno and phlebo, as in phlebotomist. The next system we'll talk about is respiratory, that ventilation of air, not only ventilating air in and out of the lungs, but also that exchange of gas, oxygen and carbon dioxide within the inner lobes of the lungs. And the lungs here are the primary structure of the respiratory system, but you also have an upper respiratory and a lower respiratory. The upper respiratory includes your nose, your nasal cavity, your sinuses, your oropharynx, your laryngopharynx, and then working down once you get past the throat, okay, the laryngopharynx, then you get into the lower respiratory, which is your trachea, your bronchi, and your lungs. Notice how the left lung is a little bit smaller than the right. Your left lung, you have two lobes because you have that apex indentional notch here to make room for the heart, and you have the superior, medial, and inferior lobes of the lungs, of the right lung. Then we have the lymphatic system, also known as your immune system. This is quite a fascinating one if you've never really sat down and studied the lymphatic system. It's one that most people don't know a whole lot about, but it is a fascinating system, how it filters out the blood, how it captures lymph in the capillary beds, how it parallels the venous system quite well in some aspects. And lymph fluid is what is filtered in the lymph nodes as part of your immune system response. So the major organs of the lymphatic system are your actual lymph vessels, your lymph nodes, which is where the filtering takes place. And you see you have a lot of nodes here in your axillary area, your abdominal area, and your inguinal area. Most are in the abdominal cavity, however. And then, of course, the lymph itself, which is a fluid that is filtered and then dumped back into the circulatory system and then used again and again. It's filtered out at the capillary level. We don't go extremely into the lymphatic system other than we will talk about how fats are absorbed within the lacteals of the small intestine, and how that's also an aspect of the lymphatic system. It's kind of cool. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we actually look at the way fats are absorbed and transported in the small intestine here shortly. Then you have the urinary system. There again, probably one of the most underrated systems. Everybody knows that the urinary system is, or the renal system is there to make urine, but that is only one of its many tremendous outstanding features. The major organs are the kidneys and the bladder, your ureters, your urethra. They filter unneeded substances from the blood, help maintain fluid balance and blood pressure and hemopoiesis, and just so much. Your kidneys do so much. So this one sentence explanation here is very simplified compared to what your kidneys really do. Fascinating. Your muscular system, okay, enables movement, works in conjunction with the skeletal system to contract and relax, causing that voluntary skeletal muscle movement. And also, you have involuntary muscle movement within your smooth muscles, within your vessels, within your digestive system, within your urinary system, um, both voluntary, and involuntary muscular movement. Speaking of the skeletal system, combining forms for bone, you have osteo or osi. I haven't been talking about sorry, I haven't been talking about medical terminology. Forgot to mention those for the other systems. Musculo here, skeletal, meaning your ossis, your osteos, tendons, tendono, ligaments, ligamento. So your skeletal system, your bones, divided up into two different systems. You have your axial skeletal system, which is for protection. That is your cranium, your spinal cavity, your thoracic cavity, and your sacrum and coccyx. That's your axial skeleton. And then you have your appendicular skeleton, which is all the bones that are involved in movement, such as the ilium, the ischial bridge here, your pubis, um, pubis bridge, humerus, radius, ulna, femur, tibia, uh, your phalanges, all of those, fibula, all of those that provide movement on the appendages. Your functions of your skeletal system, as you see here, mineral storage, hemopoiesis in the red bone marrow, energy storage in the form of yellow marrow for the long bone, movement, protection, structure, the skeletal system. The nervous system next, combining form neuro. This includes your brain, your spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves. The brain is your major kind of like CPU unit. It is your intellectual functions, your emotional responses, regulates all major body functions. And the neurons in your body, the actual nerve cells, are what are responsible for transmitting those messages throughout the body by way of neurotransmitters, by electrical impulses. And you have various types of neurons, and the nervous system itself is divided up into different subsystems, but just in general, the nervous system, the main control unit, and regulates bodily function. Your endocrine system, one of the more complicated because it deals with hormones and chemical messengers. Endo meaning within, crin meaning to secrete. So these organs, these endocrine glands, are specialized tissues that secrete a hormone, secrete a chemical that is going to perform a function in the body or turn off a function in the body. So, in other words, they regulate physiological activities, okay, functionality of the body, such as your overall metabolism, your digestion, fluid balance, maturation of the reproductive organs, your thymus for your lymphatic T cells, your thyroid, okay, your parathyroid for calcium levels, your pancreas for pancrease and insulin, and so forth, ovaries, testicles, and the reproductive system. A lot goes into the reproductive system, and there again, in the pituitary gland. Don't forget that one, the master gland. A lot goes into the endocrine system. There again, a very, very interesting and worthwhile study of the endocrine system if you ever get a chance. Then we move to the integumentary system. Integumento means to cover, but it's not only the skin. When we talk about the integumentary system, yes, skin is part of that, but it also includes the accessory organs that are embedded in the skin, such as hair, sweat glands, your nails, and so forth. It is the body's largest organ. And there again, a lot of functions: temperature control, vitamin D production, aids in vitamin D production due to the ultraviolet light that hits the skin, part of your immune system barrier, okay, part of, um, like I said, your immune system keeping, um, it's like your suit of armor in a way. Your hair and your nails, your oil glands, all within the integumentary system. And then lastly, reproduction. Okay. Obviously, the main function is to reproduce. So you have the secondary sex characteristics of both male and female. You have the mammary glands that are responsible for nourishing life after birth. With the female, you have the uterus, the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, the vagina, the two um, um, or the gamete, the female ova of the female reproductive system, matured through the help of the hormones estrogen and progesterone every month, and known as the menstrual cycle or menses, and the conduit for growing that new life within the uterus and um, creating that life and delivering it to the outside world upon childbirth. The male reproductive system, you have the external gonads known as the testes, responsible for spermatogenesis, and then the remaining internal abdominal, pelvic glands that are responsible for the production of semen, for the nourishment and motility of sperm outside of the body for overall reproduction. So the development of the male gamete known as the sperm, the development of the female gamete known as the ova. So let's focus now on the digestive system, which is what this course is all about as far as nutrition. So digestive, di meaning two, you have mechanical breakdown of food through the mastication, which is chewing, the mastication of your food through the grinding and chewing and tearing of food with the teeth. And then the chemical digestion, which begins in the mouth, but works in throughout the rest of the digestive system to break down those nutrients so that they are able to be absorbed. Okay. So absorption. Well, I guess digestion, the number one, the breakdown of the food into its smaller nutrient components, and then the absorption of those components. The digestive system, also oftentimes called the GI tract or the gastrointestinal tract, gastro meaning stomach, intestinal meaning your small and large intestine, and allowing that absorption to happen in the GI tract so those nutrients can enter into the bloodstream. So let's start at the mouth and we will work our way down. So the gastrointestinal tract, one big long muscular tube that extends from the mouth to the anus. The major pathway Of the if we were to take food and follow it throughout the intestinal system, it would follow these major routes. So these are what we call direct, um, the direct GI. Another term, real quick, before we get started, is of the digestive system and gastrointestinal tract. Sometimes you might also hear it called the alimentary canal. It's one of the older terms for it, but I wanted to mention that because you might see it in some of your references. So when we eat food, it enters the mouth. It enters the mouth as food. Once it's masticated and mixed up, chewed up with saliva, we swallow it as a bolus. It goes down the esophagus and will enter the stomach where it mixes with a variety of gastric juices, which we will talk about here in a minute. And then that bolus becomes chyme. That chyme is now liquidy and it is expelled into the small intestine over time. Absorption happens and then it will enter bit by bit into the large intestine. Final absorption will happen there as far as water goes, and then any waste that we do not need will be stored in the rectum until expulsion through the anus. So let's dive through and talk a little bit about some terms as we go through, and we'll go through each stage of the digestive process. So, this term bioavailability, the extent to which the digestive tract absorbs nutrients and how well the body uses them. So, part of nutrition is making sure that we can get the most bioavailable foods possible and making sure that they are of the utmost nutritious for us. So, we'll be talking about that as we go through. So, your mouth is the entranceway for food. Your mouth, also known as your oral cavity. Digestion begins in the mouth for both mechanical and chemical digestion. The mechanical process of chewing the food, also known as mastication, the biting, the tearing, the grinding of food into smaller pieces, along with the muscular tongue, helps to form that bolus that we then swallow. This whole process of swallowing, we take for granted until you cannot do it well. So, people who have had stroke or who have missing teeth or any type of muscular or neurological damage may have difficulty swallowing. So, it's not as easy as we take for granted for it to be. Then you have chemical digestion. This is the chemical breakdown of foods. Begins with amylase in the mouth, which is a component of saliva, that will help lubricate the food and allow us to swallow it. And amylase is where the beginning of starches are broken down, and we would not be able to really identify and taste foods without saliva. They must enter those taste buds, wells with moisture. So thank goodness for saliva. Once we swallow, the food is going to go down the esophagus, which is the tube that connects the pharynx, also known as the throat, to the stomach. It's simply a involuntary, smooth muscular tube that will move through food, through the form of peristalsis, these involuntary muscle contractions that will move the food down. When we talk about swallowing, you have this epiglottis, epi meaning on top, glotto meaning flap. This is this flap, muscular flap that when we swallow will flap down, as you see here, to cover the trachea so that we do not swallow food or get food or liquid into our airway. We want it to go down into the esophagus. So you see the food mass here, the bolus getting ready to swallow it. Once it's swallowed, or before it's swallowed, the epiglottis flaps down. If everything goes well, the food will then pass into the esophagus and not go down into the trachea. Peristalsis, as I mentioned before, is the involuntary smooth muscle contraction that will move the food down bit by bit by bit in a one-way direction throughout the digestive tract. Once the food enters the stomach, combining form for stomach is gastro. It will be churned. So there again, the mechanical and chemical digestion continue here in the stomach. Your stomach has several layers of muscle fibers, and you see here they are in different layers. Um, you see oblique, you see transverse, you see rectus muscles here. Oops. That allow the stomach to be able to churn and squeeze and mix those high acidic gastric juices in with the bolus and breaking it down into a more liquidy substance now called chyme. Gastric juices within your stomach are produced in the chief cells within your stomach that are going to begin to break down these the nutrients in the food, helps to kill any or a lot, not all, but a lot of bacterial infections, or excuse me, bacterial causing organisms in the food that we eat. And it takes some time for this mechanical and chemical digestion to occur within the stomach. Chyme, as I've said before, is that liquidy mixture, that partially digested mixture. If you've ever had emesis or if you've ever thrown up, that is chyme. Okay, you're throwing up that awful tasting, smelly, liquidy food component that that is coming up from your stomach. Okay. Mucus is a lubricant and a protective mechanism, a protective barrier of the stomach walls to protect your stomach organ from the hydrochloric acid here and other enzymes. And then at the end or the base, you actually have two sphincters. You have the upper gastric sphincter, known as the lower esophageal sphincter here, that is going to go directly through the diaphragm that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. And then you have your pyloric sphincter here that's going to connect the stomach to the large intestine and form this biliary tree area here that is quite a busy little area within the digestive system, which we'll talk about here in a second. That chyme is then going to enter into the duodenum here through the pyloric sphincter, excuse me, and work its way down and into the other two areas of the small intestine, your jejunum and the ileum. Different nutrients are absorbed in different areas here, and you can feed up into up until you get about to the end of the jejunum as far as doing enteral feedings. So you can do gastric feedings, you can do duodenal feedings, you can do jejunal feedings as far as somebody that may have swallowing issues or have issues with the throat where they cannot swallow, and we need to feed them alternatively. But that's about as far as you can go without going directly into the bloodstream, because after you get about past the end of the jejunum, you're running out of absorption areas. So the majority of the absorption takes place here in the jejunum. There again, it depends on which particular nutrient you're looking at absorbing. You also have this what we call type of peristalsis, but it's called segmentation, where the chyme kind of gets mixed back and forth and broken down into smaller particles and smaller particles so that it can be easily and more thoroughly absorbed. We're taking larger chunks or larger pieces and breaking them down segmentally as it goes through the small intestine, also known as entero. Small intestine combining form is known as entero. Within your small intestine, you have these finger-like lumen, or excuse me, but no, before we get to the lumen, the hole here, or the open spaces within the structure of the small intestine, is known as the lumen. Okay, it's this long tube passageway. And within that tube, you have these tiny finger-like projections known as villi or microvilli that where absorption takes place. Okay. You have these microvilli finger-like projections here that are going to brush and move the food along, as well as kind of slow down and have the chyme as it's passing through kind of stop and brush against these cells here that you see. And you have your absorptive cells, the pink ones here, okay, that are going to aid in this brush border here that is going to absorb the nutrients from the chyme and have it enter into the bloodstream through the capillaries here within each villi. Remember earlier when we talked briefly about the lymphatic system and how I said it would come up again here in the small intestine? Well, here's where it comes up at. This green tube, closed-ended tube that you see here is known as a lacteal. And um, it allows uh, fat, excuse me, to enter into the bloodstream. And like I said, it's kind of a complicated process. You have most fat soluble nutrients form what we call chylomicrons that help to absorb this fat. Remember, because fat is an essential nutrient. We need fat, we need protein. So we have these chemical messengers, these chylomicrons, also known as ultra low density lipoproteins, that are simply like triglycerides, cholesterols, proteins that help us to absorb fats here in the small intestine. Okay. It also, here at the lymphatic level, this is where lymph is extruded here within the capillary bed and enters into this lacteal to enter into the lymphatic system so it can be filtered. So if you have bacteria within your gut here or within the food that you eat and within your gut, it's going to, such as bacterias, certain um, bacteria and things are going to enter into the lymph system here and hopefully be eliminated at your lymph nodes. Here is another diagram here of how nutrients are absorbed within the small intestine. Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about this one. Here's that capillary network that you see here. And if you take that green finger-like lacteal and kind of weave it in here, you see how it's going to catch some of that lymph as it is extruded here within the blood. Also here you see the liver. The liver is a accessory organ, which we'll talk a little bit more about here as we go along. But you see here how it is integral in water soluble nutrient uptake and transport here within the small intestine and within the whole digestive tract. Your liver has a lot of functions. It's a lot like the kidney and the fact that it is kind of like your body's landfill. It helps to detoxify, it helps to make glucose, it stores nutrients, it helps eliminate nutrients, or excuse me, it helps to eliminate toxins. So it's another fascinating organ. Here's those chylomicrons that I talked about before, and how they are that lipid-rich particle that's going to absorb the fat-soluble nutrients easier and have them enter in the bloodstream easier. And they move within to the lacteal of the lymphatic system and help to transport those fats within the bloodstream. Pretty fascinating. Also within your small intestine, you have mucus there again that aids in that absorption, and it's that barrier against infection. You have these Peyer's patches, these small clusters of lymphatic tissue. And remember earlier I said that your abdominal cavity around your abdomen is the largest quantity of lymph nodes within these Peyer's patches. And it is also one of the main areas that can lead to what we call malnutrition through malabsorption if the small intestines or these areas become inflamed, okay, such as illness, swelling, fever. And we'll talk in part three specifically about some of these specific diseases that affect the GI tract. And then, real quickly to end, we will talk about the accessory organs that are outside of that GI tube that we talked about. Okay. They help contribute to the digestive process, but digestion doesn't actually happen within them, if that makes sense. So, the pancreas contributes pancrease and insulin and cholecystokinin that help to regulate your appetite. Your liver, combining form known as hepato, is integral in storing bile and, or excuse me, making bile. It is stored in the gallbladder. And you see the gallbladder here. And this whole area that I talked about earlier when we talked about the pyloric sphincter area here with the duodenum, this area here is known as the biliary tree because you have a lot of tubes and three different organs kind of feeding into this one area here of the duodenum. So specifically, the pancreas is a lateral organ on the left-hand side of the body, kind of tucked behind the stomach. It produces most of the digestive enzymes that help you break down fats. Like I said earlier, your cholecystokinin is the hormone that is produced in the small intestine that helps to stimulate bile to be secreted from the liver and from the gallbladder. And it helps to neutralize the higher hydrochloric acid that is coming from the chyme here within the small intestine. Okay, so we don't eat away at our small intestine as it travels through. Your liver, combining form hepato, produces many nutrients, stores many nutrients and processes, metabolizes alcohol and makes cholesterol and bile. Okay, so your body makes all the cholesterol you need, in essence, and it makes bile. Your gallbladder, which is this green sac, um, pretty much the bile is produced in the liver. It is stored here in the gallbladder until called upon here, based on these cholecystokinins response to how much fat we've eaten. And then, gallstones, as you see, gallstones, just like kidney stones, can form and be a considerable amount of pain, and they can block the duct there in this biliary tree area that I talked about. Either they can happen here in the hepatic duct or they can happen here in the cholecystoduct, really anywhere along the line there. Cystic fibrosis is one of the many pathologies of the GI system that we'll learn about, but it also affects the respiratory system. It is an inherited incurable disease that affects both respiratory and GI. As far as respiratory, it produces this thick mucus that blocks the airways and also blocks the digestive system. So it interferes with digestion, can cause stunting of growth, can lead to fat malabsorption, and it can lead to serious breathing issues. You have that thick, sticky mucus that's clogging the um, lower respiratory system. Okay, can be fatal and oftentimes is fatal, or at least it used to be. And we have better treatments now, but still very serious. Or can be. We now have these pancreatic enzymes that help to alleviate some of the malabsorption gut issues, but the respiratory system issue is a whole nother ballgame. Okay. And then lastly, your large intestine. Hang on. Sorry to scroll you around like that. And then lastly, your large intestine, known as your colon. As you see here, kind of looks like a big question mark, doesn't it? You have the five different sections of the large intestine. You have your ascending colon. Well, actually, you begin here with the cecum, this area that attaches the ileum to the cecal area here of the colon. You have your appendix, which is part of your lymphatic system, a storage unit for good gut bacteria, your ascending colon, your transverse colon, your descending colon, your S-shaped sigmoid colon, then your rectum. Okay. So the function of your colon or your large intestine, as far as nutrient absorption goes, you will absorb some sodium, some vitamin K, some B vitamins, but mainly it is your sodium and chloride for electrolyte balance and mainly water. Okay, because remember, up to this point, your food that you've eaten that became a bolus that is now chyme has made its way through the small intestine in liquid form. Now it is that water, now that we've got absorbed most of what we need out of it, as this food or chyme, digestive nutrients, now all we have left is non-digestible fiber and waste. And as it works its way up through the ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colon, it's going to have water reabsorbed out of it. So the feces becomes more semi-solid as it works its way around. And then lastly, you have the rectum, which is where feces is stored until it is reaches a certain fill point, I guess you would say, and it triggers those internal anal sphincters to trigger the brain, the neurological system of the brain, to have a what we call a defecation, which is different than necessarily a bowel movement, although oftentimes they are called the same thing. But remember, your colon, your large intestine, will move in this transactional involuntary constriction um, daily. Okay, but not all the time do people defecate daily. So, but the bowel will constantly move in one systemic way daily, pushing that waste through until eliminated. Through the anal canal, you have an internal anal sphincter and an external anal sphincter. So when we look at the digestive system as a whole, when we look at also known as the gastrointestinal tract, also known as the alimentary canal, you go from mouth to esophagus to some stomach to small intestine to large intestine to rectum and out, with the help of your accessory glands known as your salivary glands, your pancreas, your gallbladder, and your liver. You see those here, whoops, in this wonderful diagram from your textbook, a very good resource because it lists the organs, the secretions, and the primary digestive functions of each. So I would definitely take some time and read through each one and familiarize yourself with the digestive process at each step. For part 3, we will look at pathology of the digestive system. In other words, the major diseases that can go wrong with it. And we will also look at the microbes and the prebiotics and probiotics and the helpful microbes within your digestive tract that aid in this digestive process. Please email me or let me know if you have any questions. I am here to help. Thank you.